When royal guards show ZaERO tolerance to entitled KARENS, emotional stories royal guards. The morning sun shone brightly over the grand palace, its golden light reflecting off the tall, perfectly polished gates. Tourists had already started to gather in small groups, some snapping pictures, others chatting excitedly about the history and beauty of the place. Flags fluttered gently in the breeze, and the soft sound of footsteps echoed against the marble pathways. Everything seemed calm and orderly, a picture of serenity, but it was about to be disrupted in a way no one expected. Elaine, a woman in her late 40s, arrived in a shiny black car that pulled up at the main entrance. She wore designer sunglasses, a crisp white blouse, and carried a large handbag that seemed almost too big for her frame. From the moment she stepped out of the car, she walked with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. Her heels clicked loudly against the stone floor, drawing the attention of some tourists, who whispered to each other about how she seemed important or used to getting her way. Elaine barely noticed them. She was focused on herself, on the experience she believed she deserved. The royal guards were already stationed at key points around the palace. Dressed in their traditional uniforms, they stood tall and alert, their expressions calm but sharp. Each movement was precise, every posture disciplined, and every pair of eyes scanning for even the smallest disruption. These guards had seen crowds like this many times before, children giggling, families excitedly taking photos, elderly couples admiring the architecture. But they had also seen moments of chaos, usually caused by someone unwilling to follow the rules. Elaine's first step onto the palace grounds was cautious, almost as if she were testing the space to see if it would bend to her expectations. She paused briefly to admire the fountains, but instead of quietly enjoying the view like most visitors, she began to take out her phone. She aimed it at the guards, taking pictures up close without permission. One of the younger tourists nearby whispered to her friend, "Is she allowed to take photos like that?" Another tourist shook her head, thinking silently about how rude the behavior seemed. Elaine ignored all of this. She moved closer to the railings near a restricted area, peering over them as though the sign that read "No Entry" didn't exist. The guards noticed immediately. One of them, Sergeant Thompson, a tall man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, stepped forward. His voice was polite but firm. "Excuse me, ma'am, that area is restricted. Please step back." Elaine turned slowly, a slight frown forming on her face. She gave a small, almost imperceptible laugh. "Oh, come on," she said. "It's just a railing. Surely you can let me see from here. I've traveled a long way to be here. Don't you think I deserve a closer look?" Sergeant Thompson remained unmoved. His voice stayed steady, his posture unbroken. "The rules apply to everyone, ma'am. I'm afraid I can't let you enter this area." Elaine's frown deepened, and she glanced around at the other tourists. She seemed frustrated that her presence did not command immediate respect. The people around her were watching quietly, some with curiosity, others with slight amusement at her audacity. Instead of apologizing or stepping back, she adjusted her sunglasses and leaned a little further over the railing, clearly testing the guards' patience. The guards had been trained to deal with situations like this calmly. They were taught that losing their temper or reacting aggressively would only escalate things. So, they observed her silently, communicating with each other through small gestures and nods. Other visitors tried to avoid the area, giving her space, while some brave souls took out their phones to capture the unusual scene. The palace, usually filled with respectful whispers and the gentle sounds of nature, now had an undercurrent of tension. Elaine wasn't done. She started speaking loudly, as if the guards could hear her complaints better if she raised her voice. "I just want a better view," she exclaimed. "I've seen pictures of this place, but nothing compares to being here. Surely you can make an exception. Don't you want visitors to enjoy themselves?" Sergeant Thompson stepped slightly closer, maintaining a professional distance. "Ma'am, I understand that you want to enjoy the view, but rules are in place for safety. Please step back from the railing." Elaine's reaction was a mixture of disbelief and indignation. She crossed her arms and tapped her foot impatiently, clearly upset that her demands were being ignored. She started muttering to herself, loud enough for the nearby tourists to hear, complaining about how unfair the situation was and how guards were so rigid these days. The crowd of tourists began to grow, sensing that something unusual was happening. Some whispered to each other, expressing concern for how a single person's attitude could affect the mood of the palace. Others watched silently, intrigued by the confrontation. Elaine, seemingly oblivious to the attention, continued to push the limits, moving closer to restricted areas, reaching over signs and snapping more photos. Through all of this, the guards maintained their calm. Sergeant Thompson and his team stayed alert, ready to act if the situation escalated, but without showing any sign of anger or frustration. Their presence alone was commanding. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't make sudden movements. They simply stood tall, their expression steady, their eyes focused. It was a lesson in discipline, and everyone watching could see it. Elaine, however, was determined to assert herself. She began speaking to a nearby staff member, demanding that they let her through, and insisting that she had traveled from far away to experience the palace in full. The staff member, trained to handle difficult visitors, tried to explain politely that the rules applied to everyone and that she must follow them. Elaine's frustration grew, and she waved her hand dismissively, as though their words held no weight. At this moment, the other tourists started to take sides silently. Some felt sympathy for the guards, impressed by their patience and professionalism. Others felt uneasy, worried that the situation might worsen. Children nearby clung to their parents, sensing the tension but not fully understanding the conflict. The atmosphere, which had begun as calm and orderly, now had a layer of tension that was palpable. Despite her loud complaints and continued attempts to bend the rules, the royal guards remained unwavering. They communicated through small, precise gestures, coordinating silently while keeping a watchful eye on Elaine. It was clear that they were prepared for any escalation, but their approach was measured, controlled, and respectful. They didn't mock her, they didn't argue back, they simply upheld the rules with quiet authority. Elaine, finally sensing that the guards would not budge, paused for a moment. Her frown deepened as she considered her options. The other visitors around her looked on, some trying to hide smiles, others feeling relief that order had not yet broken down. The tension hung in the air, heavy but controlled, as the palace continued to shimmer under the morning sun. It was in this moment that the true contrast became apparent. On one side was Elaine, a single person accustomed to entitlement, trying to bend reality to suit her desires. On the other side were the royal guards, representing discipline, fairness, and a quiet strength that commanded respect without raising a voice. The palace itself seemed to hold its breath, as if recognizing the significance of this simple but powerful lesson. No one is above the rules, and true authority lies in composure, patience, and unwavering respect for duty. Elaine finally took a step back, though it was reluctant. The guards maintained their stance, allowing her to realize on her own that defiance would not win. The other tourists, relieved that the confrontation had not escalated further, began to murmur quietly among themselves. Children returned to their parents' sides, and the palace slowly resumed its rhythm, as though nothing had happened. But the moment had left a mark on everyone who witnessed it. By the time Elaine wandered off, muttering to herself about the rigidity of guards, the palace had returned to calm. But the story of that morning, the quiet courage of the royal guards, and the patience with which they handled entitlement, would linger in the minds of the visitors for a long time. It was a reminder that true authority and respect are earned, not demanded, and that sometimes the smallest acts of discipline can leave the largest impact. Elaine did not seem ready to give up. As she moved away from the railing, she cast a quick glance back at the guards. Her face was a mixture of frustration and disbelief, as if she could not understand why her presence alone did not command respect. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the palace grounds, and the air was filled with the gentle sounds of laughter, camera clicks, and murmured conversations. Yet for Elaine, all she could hear was the voice in her head insisting that she should be treated differently. Ignoring the soft whispers of other tourists, Elaine wandered further into the palace gardens. She noticed a beautiful statue surrounded by a low fence. Without hesitation, she stepped over the barrier to get a closer look. A younger guard, Officer Patel, who had been quietly observing her, approached carefully. His expression was calm but serious. "Ma'am, please step back. That area is off-limits to visitors." Elaine turned slowly, her eyebrows raised. "Oh, come on, it's just a statue. Surely I can take a closer look," she said, her tone tinged with irritation. "I've traveled all this way. Don't you think a little flexibility is in order?" Officer Patel maintained his composure. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The rules are there to protect the statue and everyone around it. I can't allow anyone to cross the barrier." Elaine huffed and muttered something under her breath, loud enough for nearby tourists to hear. "They're so unreasonable. A little thing like this shouldn't matter." She glanced around as if searching for an ally, but everyone nearby was keeping their distance, unsure whether to intervene or just watch silently. The royal guards were masters of reading situations. Sergeant Thompson, who had been observing from a distance, noticed that Elaine's frustration was growing and that she might soon test the rules even further. He signaled subtly to Officer Patel, reminding him to remain calm but firm. It was a delicate balance. They could not let her behavior escalate, but they also could not act in a way that might provoke her. The entire team moved like a well-oiled machine, each member aware of their role. Elaine, oblivious to the silent coordination, began speaking even louder. She gestured toward the statue, addressing a nearby staff member. "Excuse me, can't you see I just want a better look? I don't understand why you're being so strict. Surely I deserve this. Don't you care about visitors?" The staff member smiled politely but shook her head. "Ma'am, we want everyone to enjoy the palace safely. Please follow the rules. The guards are just doing their job." Elaine's eyes narrowed. She looked around at the group of tourists who had gathered at a distance to watch the situation unfold. Some were filming, some were whispering, and some were simply shaking their heads in disbelief. She seemed to take their attention as validation of her importance, and her voice grew louder. "Why should rules apply to me? I've come all this way. I've spent a lot of money to be here. Surely they can make an exception." Sergeant Thompson walked a few steps closer, his posture straight and unwavering. "Ma'am, rules are for everyone, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Please step back from the statue and the restricted area." Elaine blinked in surprise. She was not used to being told no so firmly. Usually, a little complaint, a raised voice, or a hint of influence was enough to bend people to her wishes. But here the guards remained steady, neither angry nor fearful, just calm and unyielding. The other tourists noticed this, and a few murmured quietly to each other. "Wow, they really mean it. She can't just get her way," one whispered. Instead of stepping back, Elaine began pacing near the statue, muttering complaints under her breath. The guards watched her carefully, giving her space but staying close enough to intervene if necessary. Sergeant Thompson noticed that Elaine's actions were starting to disturb the other visitors. Families with children were becoming uneasy, and some people were trying to quietly move past without getting involved. It was clear that her behavior, though not violent, was causing tension in what was usually a peaceful environment. Elaine's frustration reached a new level when she spotted a small, ornate garden that was marked as a staff-only area. Ignoring the sign, she walked toward the entrance, clearly planning to step inside. Officer Patel quickly moved in front of her, blocking her path. "Ma'am, please do not enter that area. It's restricted to staff only." Elaine's face turned red with anger. "This is ridiculous. I just want to see the garden. I'm a paying visitor. Surely they can let me in." She looked around again, seeking support from other tourists. Most of them avoided her gaze, sensing that she was creating unnecessary trouble. Sergeant Thompson stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, you cannot enter this area. Please return to the visitor sections." Elaine's lips pressed into a thin line. She seemed to be calculating her next move, as if trying to decide whether to comply or continue to challenge the rules. The guards remained patient, understanding that her defiance was not about the garden or the statue. It was about her sense of entitlement. They had seen this before. People who were used to getting their way often tested boundaries, hoping to find a weakness. But today, the guards were not going to allow it. Nearby tourists began to whisper among themselves, sharing their observations. "She's really pushing it," one said. "I can't believe she's being so rude." Another commented, "I'm glad the guards are staying calm. They could easily lose their temper, but they're handling it so well." Elaine, realizing that the guards were not going to budge, decided to take a different approach. She began speaking in an even louder voice, complaining about how unfair it was that the palace would not bend its rules for her. Her words echoed across the gardens, drawing the attention of even more visitors. Children paused in their play to watch, and some families stopped walking to see what would happen next. Despite the growing attention, the royal guards did not react emotionally. They continued to stand tall, communicating silently with subtle gestures to each other. Their calmness in the face of Elaine's escalating behavior seemed almost unshakable. It was clear to everyone that they were in control of the situation, and that no amount of complaining or yelling would change that. Finally, Elaine tried one last tactic. She stepped closer to Officer Patel, hoping her presence alone would intimidate him into letting her pass. She leaned forward slightly and spoke in a sharp tone. "I just don't understand why you can't make an exception. Surely one small step won't hurt anything." Officer Patel held his ground, his voice steady. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. The rules are the same for everyone. Please step back." For a moment, Elaine stared at him, as if expecting him to suddenly give in. When that did not happen, her frustration became palpable. She muttered under her breath, turned sharply, and began walking away from the restricted area, but not before shooting a glare at the guards that could have burned through stone. The other visitors, who had been watching anxiously, let out quiet sighs of relief. Children returned to their parents, and the atmosphere in the garden slowly began to return to its usual calm. Some tourists approached the guards quietly, offering small words of thanks for maintaining order. Sergeant Thompson and Officer Patel nodded politely, but they did not smile or boast. Their work was done quietly, with professionalism, as if the incident had been just another day on duty. Elaine, meanwhile, wandered off, still muttering complaints but no longer attempting to push any further. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that her sense of entitlement did not carry weight in this place. The palace, the rules, and the guards' discipline stood firm against her demands. As the sun continued its climb in the sky, the palace gardens returned to their peaceful rhythm. Visitors resumed their tour, children's laughter filled the air, and the fountains sparkled in the sunlight. Yet the morning's events left a quiet impression on everyone who had witnessed them. The scene had been a lesson in respect, patience, and authority, the kind that did not need to raise a voice or make threats to be effective. The royal guards, standing quietly in their positions, were an unspoken reminder that discipline and fairness often speak louder than words. Elaine, though frustrated, had learned that day that rules exist for a reason, and that no amount of privilege could bend them. And the visitors, both close and far, would carry with them the memory of the guards' calm strength, a lesson that would remain long after the palace gates closed for the day. Elaine's frustration had not faded. As she walked through the palace gardens, her eyes darted from one beautiful structure to another, but nothing seemed to satisfy her. Every path she took, every sculpture she passed, seemed to spark a new thought in her mind. Why couldn't she have more freedom? Why couldn't the guards understand that she deserved special treatment? Her steps quickened, her gestures became sharper, and the murmurs of annoyance under her breath grew louder. Sergeant Thompson, stationed near the central fountain, had been keeping an eye on her from a distance. He noticed that her behavior was escalating again, and he sensed that she might soon attempt to cross another boundary. Quietly, he gestured to Officer Patel and two other guards who had been patrolling nearby. They moved subtly, maintaining their calm composure, forming a gentle but firm perimeter around Elaine. It was a silent, unspoken way of saying, "We are watching, and we are ready to act if needed, but we will not provoke confrontation." Elaine, however, was oblivious to the strategic coordination. She spotted a beautifully manicured flower garden that was marked with signs reading, "Do not enter protected area." Without hesitation, she stepped onto the path, ignoring the signs entirely. Officer Patel stepped in immediately, placing himself in her path. "Ma'am," he said firmly but politely, "this area is restricted. Please step back." Elaine turned, her expression a mixture of disbelief and irritation. "Restricted? It's just a garden. I want to see the flowers up close. Surely one person won't cause any harm." "Why are you being so strict?" Patel's calm eyes met hers. "I understand that you want to enjoy the garden, ma'am, but the rules are here to protect the plants and all visitors. I cannot let anyone enter." Elaine sighed loudly, exasperated. She looked around as if hoping someone else would back her up. The nearby tourists avoided her gaze, many of them quietly shaking their heads in frustration or amusement. A few children stopped to watch, sensing tension but unsure of what was happening. Elaine's voice rose again, louder this time, echoing off the palace walls. "I can't believe this," she exclaimed. "I've traveled so far, I've spent so much money, and now I can't even see a few flowers. This is ridiculous." Sergeant Thompson stepped forward, placing himself between her and the restricted garden. "Ma'am," he said in a calm, steady voice, "rules are the same for everyone. Please step back from this area." Elaine's face flushed red. Her entitlement had been challenged, and she was unaccustomed to being told no. She tried another tactic, leaning forward, attempting to bypass the guard. "Come on," she said sharply. "Just this once. You can make an exception. Don't you want visitors to be happy?" Thompson remained unshaken. "I'm afraid I cannot allow that, ma'am. The rules exist for a reason, and I have to follow them." Elaine's frustration boiled over. She spun around, muttering complaints under her breath, but loud enough for nearby tourists to hear. "They're so rigid. Why can't anyone understand my situation? I've traveled from so far and they just won't listen. It's unbelievable." At that moment, another group of visitors arrived, curious about the commotion. Some whispered among themselves, noting Elaine's attitude. "She's being so rude," one tourist murmured. Another said quietly, "I'm glad the guards are handling it calmly. I don't know if I could." Elaine, noticing that all eyes were on her, seemed to take their attention as validation. Her voice grew louder, more demanding. "I deserve better treatment. Don't you understand that? I'm a paying visitor. I should be allowed to enjoy this place fully." The guards maintained their calm stance, their silence speaking volumes. They did not argue back, did not raise their voices, and did not display any signs of anger. Their discipline and composure were a quiet but powerful response to her outburst. Every movement they made was calculated, controlled, and precise, sending an unspoken message that rules were non-negotiable. Elaine's attention shifted to a small, ornate bridge over a koi pond. A "Do Not Cross" sign was posted clearly, but she moved toward it anyway. Officer Patel intercepted her again. "Ma'am, please step back. This area is not for visitors." Elaine threw her hands up in frustration. "This is unbelievable. Everywhere I turn, I'm being told no. Just one step on the bridge. Surely that won't hurt anything." Thompson stepped forward again, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. You cannot enter that area. Please follow the rules." Elaine's eyes widened and she took a step back, but only slightly. She muttered complaints under her breath, pacing along the edge of the pond. The tourists around her were now fully engaged, some recording on their phones, others whispering quietly. Children watched silently, learning, perhaps without realizing it, a lesson about respect, rules, and patience. Elaine's frustration seemed to grow with every step. She started speaking more aggressively, gesturing at the guards, complaining about how unfair the palace was. "Why should I have to follow the same rules as everyone else?" she asked loudly. "I've traveled so far. Don't you see that I deserve an exception?" Thompson's calm presence remained unchanged. He signaled subtly to Officer Patel, reminding him to stay composed and alert. It was clear to the tourists that the guards were prepared for escalation, yet they did not provoke her. Their patience and discipline were evident, and even the most skeptical onlookers could see that they were not going to be intimidated. Elaine, sensing that her complaints were not producing results, attempted a different tactic. She moved closer to the guards, speaking in a sharper tone. "You're being ridiculous. Surely one small thing won't make a difference. I just want to enjoy the palace." Thompson's response was calm and firm. "Ma'am, the rules exist to ensure safety and fairness for everyone. Please comply." Elaine stared at him for a moment, as if hoping he would suddenly give in. When he did not, her frustration turned into a mix of disbelief and embarrassment. She muttered angrily under her breath, her voice rising, but she could not find the words to justify her behavior in the face of such calm authority. Nearby tourists began murmuring among themselves. "She's really pushing it," one said quietly. "I can't believe she thinks she can get her way." Another whispered, "The guards are amazing. They're so calm, even with her yelling like that." Elaine's last attempt at defiance came when she reached for a small fountain marked as off-limits. Officer Patel immediately stepped between her and the fountain, holding his ground. "Ma'am, please step back. That area is restricted." Elaine froze, realizing that she was completely surrounded by the guards. For the first time, she seemed to understand that her usual tactics, loud complaints, demands, or gestures of importance, were not working. She muttered a final complaint under her breath but took a reluctant step back. The tension in the gardens slowly began to fade. Children returned to their parents, tourists resumed walking along the paths, and the palace returned to its usual rhythm. Elaine wandered off, muttering, but no longer trying to break any rules. She had learned, at least in that moment, that her sense of entitlement could not bend authority or break discipline. The royal guards returned to their positions, their faces calm and composed. Sergeant Thompson and Officer Patel exchanged quiet nods, acknowledging that the situation had been resolved without incident. Their actions were not celebrated with applause or attention. They were quiet, professional, and effective. The tourists who had witnessed the events were left with a lasting impression of their discipline, respect, and patience. By the time the sun reached its peak, the palace gardens were peaceful once again. Visitors moved freely along the paths, children laughed and played, and the fountains sparkled in the light. Yet the memory of Elaine's confrontation remained with those who had witnessed it. The story would be retold quietly among tourists, staff, and visitors. A tale of patience, authority, and the quiet strength of those who enforce rules with fairness and respect. It was a powerful reminder that discipline and calm authority can speak louder than anger or entitlement. The guards had demonstrated that true respect is earned through integrity, patience, and professionalism, not demanded through loud complaints or displays of privilege. Elaine, for all her frustration and attempts to bend the rules, had learned that lesson, perhaps reluctantly but undeniably. The palace, serene and majestic as ever, had remained intact, a symbol not just of history and beauty, but of fairness and order. The royal guards, standing silently among the gardens, were the quiet heroes of the day, proving that courage is not always loud and strength is not always visible. It can be as simple as standing firm, staying calm, and upholding what is right, no matter the pressure. Elaine's frustration had reached a point where mere complaints and muttered grumbles were no longer enough. The palace grounds, usually calm and serene, now seemed to buzz with tension. She had wandered from the flower gardens toward a wide marble courtyard, where the central statue of the palace stood tall and majestic. Tourists had started to take notice of her, some keeping their distance, others whispering quietly among themselves. A few were recording on their phones, sensing that something unusual was unfolding, something that was more than just a minor disruption. It was a test of patience, authority, and discipline. Sergeant Thompson, observing from a few steps away, saw the moment had come. Elaine had pushed the limits too far, stepping into areas clearly restricted, ignoring signs, and speaking loudly in a way that disturbed other visitors. He signaled to Officer Patel and two other guards stationed nearby. They moved subtly, forming a careful perimeter around her. It was a silent but unmistakable message. The situation would be handled firmly, but without unnecessary confrontation. Elaine, oblivious to the coordination, turned her attention to a small fountain at the center of the courtyard. A polished marble plaque clearly indicated that visitors were not allowed beyond a certain line. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, ignoring the boundary entirely. Officer Patel moved immediately in front of her. "Ma'am," he said calmly but firmly, "please step back. This area is restricted." Elaine's face reddened, her frustration obvious. "I just want to see the fountain," she exclaimed. "It's only a few steps. Surely that won't hurt anyone. Don't you want visitors to enjoy themselves?" Thompson stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. "Ma'am, the rules are the same for everyone. Please step back." Elaine blinked in disbelief. She had never encountered such unyielding calmness in the face of her complaints. Usually her demands or loud voice would sway people, but here the guards remained resolute. She tried once more, leaning toward the fountain, her hands outstretched as if the sheer act of reaching for it would force compliance. Officer Patel gently but firmly stopped her with his hand. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I cannot let you cross this line. Please comply with the rules." Elaine's mouth opened as if to argue further, but the calm, firm expression on Patel's face, supported by the presence of Thompson and the other guards, caused a moment of hesitation. She muttered under her breath, clearly frustrated, but this pause marked a shift. For the first time, she seemed to realize that her usual tactics, loud complaints, gestures of entitlement, attempts to intimidate, were ineffective here. Sergeant Thompson spoke again, his voice steady, even as Elaine's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, you must follow the rules. I cannot make exceptions. Please step back from this area immediately." Elaine's fists clenched slightly at her sides. She opened her mouth as if to protest, but no words came out. She looked around at the small crowd of tourists who had gathered, noticing their quiet gazes and the cameras pointed in her direction. For a fleeting moment, she felt a twinge of embarrassment. She had always been able to command attention, to make people bend to her wishes. But here, in the face of calm authority, her voice seemed small and ineffective. The guards remained perfectly composed. Thompson signaled subtly to Patel, reminding him to maintain control but without aggression. This silent communication, invisible to Elaine and the visitors, demonstrated the professionalism and discipline of the royal guards. It was clear that they were prepared for escalation, but they were also skilled at de-escalating tension through calm authority. Elaine's next move was a desperate attempt to assert control. She stepped closer to Thompson, her tone sharp, almost demanding. "This is ridiculous. One small step. I've traveled all this way. You can't be serious about stopping me." Thompson's expression remained steady. "Ma'am, I am very serious. Rules apply to everyone without exception. Please step back." The other tourists watched silently, many holding their breath. Children clutched their parents' hands, sensing the tension but unsure of what would happen next. Some adults whispered quietly, impressed by the guards' calmness and professionalism. Others noted Elaine's frustration, shaking their heads at her entitlement. Elaine tried to argue further, pacing slightly as if the motion would somehow help her convince the guards. "Why do I have to follow these rules?" she demanded. "I've paid to visit. I deserve this experience. Surely one little step isn't going to harm anything." Thompson took a careful step closer, his presence calm but authoritative. "Ma'am, the rules exist for everyone's safety and to protect the palace. They are not negotiable. You must step back." Elaine froze, realizing that there was no room for negotiation. She looked at the guards surrounding her, noting their calm determination and the quiet authority in their posture. For the first time, the weight of their presence seemed to sink in. Her usual tactics were not working, and there was no immediate escape from their firm but respectful control. The crowd of tourists, now fully engaged, began to whisper among themselves. "She's really being shown how the rules work," one said. "The guards are incredible. They're so calm and professional." Another added, "It's amazing how they handle this without raising their voices." Elaine muttered one final complaint, her tone sharp but quieter than before. She took a small step back, realizing that further resistance would not yield any results. The guards did not relax their positions, but they allowed her enough space to regain composure without feeling threatened. Thompson spoke one more time, his voice calm, clear, and measured. "Ma'am, you need to understand that no one is above the rules. Please comply, and you may continue enjoying the palace within the visitor areas." Elaine's shoulders slumped slightly. She muttered something under her breath, her anger giving way to reluctant acceptance. She began to walk away from the restricted area, her steps slower now, as though processing the lesson she had just learned. The tourists around her breathed quietly, relieved that the situation had been resolved without confrontation or conflict. The guards remained vigilant, ensuring that no further incidents occurred. Their calm, measured presence had diffused a situation that could have escalated into chaos. They did not boast or celebrate. Their satisfaction came from having maintained order, upheld the rules, and protected both the palace and its visitors. Elaine wandered through the palace grounds, muttering complaints under her breath but no longer attempting to break any rules. Her demeanor had changed subtly. While still frustrated, she had recognized that her sense of entitlement had limits in the face of authority and professionalism. She noticed the orderly flow of tourists around her, the disciplined presence of the guards, and perhaps for the first time, the weight of the rules themselves. The palace gardens and courtyards gradually returned to their usual rhythm. Children's laughter echoed once more, camera clicks resumed, and the soft murmur of tourists filled the air. Yet the memory of Elaine's confrontation lingered. Those who had witnessed it would carry the story quietly, a testament to patience, discipline, and the power of calm authority in the face of entitlement. By mid-afternoon, the palace was calm again. Visitors continued their tour, enjoying the architecture, fountains, and gardens without further incident. Elaine, now distant from the central courtyard, had calmed considerably, walking quietly as she observed the palace. Perhaps she was reflecting on the morning's events, understanding in some small way that rules exist not to restrict enjoyment, but to ensure fairness, safety, and respect for everyone. The royal guards returned to their positions, standing tall and silent, yet their presence radiated a quiet strength. They had confronted entitlement without anger, without harsh words, and without compromising their principles. Their patience had not gone unnoticed. Tourists who had observed the events whispered words of admiration, quietly appreciating the professionalism and dignity displayed. The lesson was subtle but powerful. True authority does not need to shout or punish. It is measured, calm, and unwavering. It earns respect not through intimidation but through fairness, discipline, and consistency. Elaine, though frustrated and slightly embarrassed, had learned this lesson. The palace, majestic and serene, had remained untouched, a symbol of history, beauty, and order. In the quiet of the courtyard, as the fountain sparkled under the afternoon sun and the garden swayed gently in the breeze, the royal guard stood silently, their presence a reminder that respect is earned, not demanded, and that true strength often lies in patience, composure, and integrity. After the confrontation with Elaine, the palace grounds slowly returned to their usual calm. The fountain sparkled in the afternoon sunlight, the paths were filled with the soft murmur of visitors, and the garden swayed gently in the breeze. Yet, for those who had witnessed the events earlier, the day felt different. It had been a small but powerful lesson in patience, discipline, and respect, one that would remain in their memories long after they left. Elaine, now walking quietly along the marble pathways, seemed lost in thought. Her usual boldness and loud complaints had faded. The calm firmness of the royal guards had forced her to see that her sense of entitlement could not bend rules or override authority. She looked around at the other visitors, noticing families, children, and tourists all moving peacefully, enjoying the palace within the guidelines set for everyone. For the first time that day, she realized that rules were not meant to restrict enjoyment. They existed to protect everyone and ensure fairness. The royal guards, including Sergeant Thompson and Officer Patel, had returned to their posts. Their faces remained calm, their posture tall and disciplined, but there was a subtle pride in the way they moved. They had handled a challenging situation without anger, without harsh words, and without any unnecessary escalation. Their professionalism had been clear to everyone who watched. Tourists whispered quietly to each other, admiring the patience and control the guards had shown. Children who had witnessed Elaine's behavior earlier began to play again, but some of them seemed to observe the guards as they passed by. It was clear that even at a young age, they understood something important. Authority, when combined with calmness and fairness, could earn respect more effectively than anger or aggression. Parents exchanged quiet smiles, grateful that their children could witness such an example without harm or confrontation. Elaine paused near a small pavilion and sat on a stone bench. She watched the palace from a distance, taking in the beauty of the fountains, the meticulously kept gardens, and the majestic architecture. She could hear the laughter of children, the quiet murmur of families, and the soft click of cameras capturing memories. And yet, in that serene moment, she could not escape the lessons of the morning. Her attempts to bend rules, her loud complaints, and her attempts to assert herself over the royal guards had been met with calm, unwavering authority. She realized that for the first time, her usual tactics were powerless. As she reflected, Sergeant Thompson and Officer Patel continued their patrols nearby. They moved with the same quiet precision as before, observing the grounds without drawing attention to themselves. Their presence was reassuring to the visitors and served as a silent reminder of the balance between freedom and responsibility. Elaine watched them for a moment, and perhaps reluctantly, recognized the strength it took to remain calm under pressure. She thought about how easy it would have been for anyone else to lose patience with her behavior. The realization brought a quiet sense of humility. Tourists who had observed the confrontation earlier began to discuss it among themselves. "I've never seen anyone handle that so well," one whispered. "She was so loud and demanding, and yet the guards didn't even flinch." Another added, It's amazing how calm they stayed. They didn't argue, they didn't yell, they just stood firm. That's real strength. These conversations spread quietly through the palace grounds, a subtle recognition of the professionalism and discipline of the guards. Elaine, still seated on the bench, reflected on her own behavior. She thought about how she had tried to assert herself, expecting instant compliance, and how she had been forced to step back. She felt a mix of embarrassment and enlightenment. It was not easy to admit that her usual ways of getting what she wanted were ineffective here, but she could not deny the truth. She had been met with fairness, patience, and calm authority, and it had worked. The palace staff moved around efficiently, guiding visitors, answering questions, and ensuring that everyone could enjoy the day. They had witnessed the confrontation as well, and quietly admired the way the guards had handled the situation. There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, just a demonstration of discipline, patience, and respect for everyone involved. It was a reminder that true authority does not need to be loud or aggressive. It can be quiet, firm, and consistent. Elaine eventually stood up, taking a slow walk toward the exit. She passed the areas she had tried to enter earlier, this time respecting the signs and boundaries. The realization that she could not bend the rules in her favor seemed to settle in her mind. It was a quiet, personal lesson in humility. She noticed the smiles of the staff, the disciplined posture of the guards, and the peaceful flow of visitors. It struck her that order, fairness, and patience created a better experience for everyone, not just herself. The royal guards continued their patrols, their eyes alert but their movements calm and controlled. They had seen many visitors, many disruptions, but each situation required a balance of authority and patience. Today they had faced a visitor whose sense of entitlement tested their discipline, and they had succeeded, not through anger, not through force, but through unwavering calmness, professionalism, and respect for the rules. Their example was now a quiet lesson for everyone who had watched. As Elaine exited the palace grounds, she glanced back at the majestic building. She realized that her experience had been more than just a visit. It had been an unexpected lesson in respect, humility, and understanding the value of rules. The palace, the guards, and the staff had all maintained their dignity while ensuring that everyone could enjoy the visit safely. She felt a mixture of relief, embarrassment, and a quiet respect for the discipline she had witnessed. Visitors continued to flow through the palace, enjoying the gardens, fountains, and architecture. Children laughed, parents guided them along the paths, and tourists captured memories with their cameras. Yet the story of the morning, the confrontation between Elaine and the royal guards, lingered in subtle ways. People whispered to each other, sharing their observations and quietly acknowledging the lesson in patience and fairness. The palace had not been disrupted, but it had been the setting for a memorable, real-life demonstration of calm authority. Elaine walked toward the exit, reflecting quietly. She realized that true authority is not about power or loudness. It is about fairness, patience, and the courage to uphold principles even when challenged. The guards had demonstrated that clearly. They had handled her behavior without anger, without aggression, and without compromising the rules. Their calm presence had made her understand that respect is earned through integrity and discipline, not demanded through complaints or entitlement. As she passed through the palace gates, Elaine felt a quiet sense of reflection. Her visit had been more than just sightseeing. It had been a lesson she would not forget. She realized that humility and respect are essential in every situation, and that trying to bend rules for personal convenience often leads to frustration. The palace, with its grandeur and discipline, had shown her the value of patience, calmness, and fairness. Back inside the palace, the guards resumed their normal patrols, their faces calm, their posture tall, and their movements precise. The visitors who remained continued their tour, unaware of the small but powerful lessons being quietly absorbed by those around them. The day continued peacefully, filled with laughter, admiration for the architecture, and the soft murmur of visitors enjoying the palace grounds. For Elaine, the lesson was personal and lasting. She had learned that entitlement does not command respect, that rules exist to protect everyone, and that true authority is shown through calmness, patience, and fairness. She had been challenged, humbled, and ultimately enlightened by the quiet strength of the royal guards. It was a lesson she would carry with her far beyond the palace gates. By the end of the day, the palace had returned to its serene rhythm. Tourists left with memories of beauty and order, children laughed and played, and the royal guards continued their duties, unseen but deeply respected. The story of Elaine and the guards would be quietly remembered by those who witnessed it, a testament to the power of calm authority and the enduring value of fairness and discipline. The palace stood majestic and timeless, its walls silently witnessing the events of the day. And in that quiet majesty, the lesson remained clear. True respect is earned through patience, integrity, and unwavering adherence to principles. For Elaine and for everyone who observed, it had been a day to remember, not just for the beauty of the palace, but for the quiet, powerful demonstration of real-life discipline and authority.